says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eibishter, God. He says, and who is this God? You know this God?
Wow.
At that moment he realized he didn't. He says, no. So they said, come with us to Kotzker. There you'll learn who this God is. So he goes to Kotzker, and later he would become the biggest follower of Mordechai Yosef Leiner of Ishbitz, and he would actually continue the Ishbitz dynasty in a sense. There was again a child, and the greatest chassid would continue it. But at this point he was in Kotzker. And in Kotzker, when you came into Kotzker, they belittled you, so you shouldn't be arrogant because of your background, your family name. They didn't call anybody a rabbi. There was only one rabbi. That was the Kotzker. Everybody else was Labela. It wasn't even a rabbi. It was their name and the father's name. In fact, just on an aside, when people would come into Kotzker, first thing they would do was they would take all of their stuff and give it out to everybody. It's like a commune. There wasn't real. They weren't heavy on ownership things there. It was just like divided. They'd have a big farbrengen, and everybody would get. Go out and buy food and mashka, and everybody would get the newcomers' income. So it was a little bit of communism going on. Kibbutz. It was like a kibbutz. Communal living. And then the next morning the person would wake up a little late, and the Hasidim would get up really early and daven and learn, and then they'd go back to sleep. And by the time this newcomer this was like a game they played. By the time the newcomer would get up, he would see everybody was asleep. So he would go to the shul, and there'd be like an old man. Again, I'm taking a little bit of license, a little liberty here with the story. There'd be an old man with a long white beard, and he would say, "Nu, what's going on?" Say, "Where's everybody? They're sleeping." He says, "Oh, you woke up early." He says, yeah, but it's not that early. It's actually late. I have to daven. Zman Tefillah is passing quickly by. The time of davening is quickly passing by. And the older chassid with a long white beard would say, "Come on, we're chassidim. We're not misnagdim here. Before you daven, make a l'chaim, eat something," and they would pour him a glass of mashka. And the chassid, the new chassid would take the glass of mashka and make a l'chaim, and the other people would come out and they'd give him a little slap, perhaps a little, maybe not a physical slap, but a little reprimand. They would say, because somebody with a beard tells you to do something, do it. In other words, you think because somebody is telling you, you have to be true. If you want to daven, you're supposed to daven now on time. Don't just make a l'chaim because of some older man or gentle. You're listening. You're not listening to God. You're listening to a white beard. That's what they would say. The Kotzker used to make fun of a certain chassid or a certain misnagid. He would say he learned because of a cat. What do you mean he learned because of a cat? Say he had a very wealthy in-laws who paid him to sit and learn. But he didn't know when his in-laws were there. He wasn't too big. He didn't learn unless people knew he was learning. He was a little lazy. But if somebody was around, specifically his in-laws, he would sit and learn and raise his voice in Torah. And they had a cat in the house. So the cat would walk around. He didn't know he was in the study. So the cat would walk around, knock against the furniture. He would think it's his mother-in-law and father-in-law. So he would raise his voice and learn with great, depth. And the Kotzker Rebbe said it was all for the cat. Learning. So this is how they were mamish very sharp. The Kotzker had a lot of enemies because he said it like it is. People didn't always like that.
It was a dissident.
He should
have had a talk radio show.
Yeah, he would have been good on the talk radio.
At the time, right?
Yeah. So getting back to Leibele Eger. So Leibele Eger he's by the Kotzker, and one of his father's friends comes to visit him. By the way, I want to tell you, in Kotzker Rebbe, they're mamish into learning. The biggest Talmidei Chachamim in Poland were the disciples of the Kotzker, like the Avnei Nezer, the people, the son-in-law of the Kotzker, the Sfas Emes, the grandson of Yitzchak Meir Alter of Gur, which was the main disciple of the Kotzker. They were mamish unbelievable, because in Pshischa and in Kotzk they learned Gemara day and night, but at the same time no respect. They didn't respect people just because they learned Gemara. When somebody came to the Kotzker and said he went through Shas 5 times, the Kotzker said, "And how many times did the Shas go through you?" So you went through it. You read a lot of pages. Now, what did it do to you? So Leibele Eger, his father's friend came to see him, and maybe to try to recruit him back. So he comes and he asks, "Where's Reb Leibele Eger?" He says, "Reb Leibele." They didn't use last name so much. He said, "Reb Leibele, there's no rabbis here. There's the Rebbe, and that's it." So first he's already insulted. They're not giving Reb Leibele Eger, even if you don't want to call him a rabbi for his own sake, for his grandfather and his fathers, Reb Shlomo Eger, Reb Akiva Eger. So finally they said, "You mean Reb Shlomo's Leibele?" In other words, Leibele, the son of Shlomo. They said, "Yeah." He said, "Yes, okay." They send him over there. He's by the well. He comes to the well, and Reb Leibele Eger is doing his laundry. He was doing his own laundry, and I guess he was up to his socks. He didn't have that many pairs of socks. It was busy standing barefoot, washing his pair of socks by the well. And his father's friend couldn't believe, this is a Talmud Chacham, how he treats himself. He starts yelling at him, saying, "What is going on here? This is a degradation of Torah. Even if you don't care, it's an insult for you and for your father and for your grandfather for you to be going like this." After 5 minutes of this onslaught, he stops, he finishes, he waits for Leibele Eger to finish, to respond. And Leibele Eger says, "Go back and tell my father one thing." So there's one thing that we learn in Kotzk. The more you know you're nothing. Sounds better in Yiddish.
How do you say it in Yiddish?
So this is the essence, in a sense, of what they were being taught. You see, spiritual ego is very strong. In fact, paradoxically, the Kotzker didn't go. There were other rabbis that were considered to be gedolim, greater rabbis, both in Torah knowledge and Kabbalah knowledge, and l'cha'ira, meaning similarly, the Kotzker should have gone to them to pledge his allegiance, to be mevatel himself, to nullify himself, to say, "You're a Rebbe of mine," and he didn't go. He had Rebbes earlier, he had the Seer, he had the Simcha Bunim, he had the Yiddish Kaddish middle. And he says, "I don't go." Why don't I go? He says, because when you go to a Rebbe, it makes you arrogant. Because he was trying, what do you mean? Going to a Rebbe is just the opposite. You're humble, you're humbling yourself. But the meaning is that you feel like I'm officially part of this thing, and if the Rebbe is great, I'm automatically great. So it gives you a spiritual arrogance. I don't want to have that spiritual arrogance. Better to know that I'm nothing.